running through in this course is that the point of worship is to do what God tells you to do. My Anglican teacher, Cyril Richardson, said, Calvin had no interest in pointing out what anybody got out of it. The important thing was to do what God told you to do. And Anglican comment. And in his word, for natural fallen human nature, as Calvin puts it, is involved in a cloud of errors, and therefore scarcely obtains from the law of nature the smallest idea of what worship is. We're going to be using a book in this course, which unfortunately is out of print. It's by Edward A. Dowey, Jr. It was his doctoral dissertation, which he wrote in Switzerland under Emil Brunner himself. It's called The Knowledge of God and Calvin's Theology. Before the end of the course, you should read through page 147, I think it's what you're reading with. And he sums up Calvin's theology of worship in this way. I like it. Vague, pious feelings, implemented by haphazardly chosen forms, are not acceptable to God. The difference between worship that is acceptable to God and that which is not a matter simply of the intentions of the worshiper, but of the revealed character of the forms used. Now, the question came up last time, right then, I'm glad somebody learned something from some course, that we do not have in the entire New Testament an outline of Christian worship. We don't. You have said that. That's very good. Have you thought about full-time church work? Good. And what the Protestant Reformers did is take medieval worship books, which is what they had, and then change these in the light of the gospel and in the light of the early church. Have these medieval forms. They now change them in terms of the new understanding of the New Testament and the early church. But the basic structure of their worship was simply taken over from late medieval orders. And despite polemic appeals to the Bible against specific ideas, none of the reformers attempted to adopt the New Testament systematically as a formal pattern, because there was no complete outline. But they took traditional forms and corrected them to convey biblical meanings. The title of Calvin's service book was called The Form of Prayers According to the Custom of the Early Church. And by the early church, he did not just mean the first century, but the second century as well. So, the reformers accepted the patterns established by the second century and changed them as we have seen. Again, this word, Dr. Chicks has informed me that he's been able to use this word in the course. Adiaphora. Remember the word adiaphora? What does it mean? Things indifferent. You have the Luther course, exactly. There are lots of things indifferent. The Bible does not tell us whether the communion wine is to be red, white, or blush. They also mean that according to the very earliest worship of the Christian church, the Lord's Supper was celebrated in terms of a full-blown meal. Are you all aware of that? A full-blown meal. There were two services of worship in the early church. The service of the Word in the morning, which comes right out of Judaism. Nothing new about that. And then that uniquely Christian thing with a meal at night. And some of you know from some of my other marvelous courses that what happened was this. It got to be too dangerous to have the Lord's Supper served at night because it was a dead giveaway. People carried big baskets of food up and down the street. And the cops would know, therefore, that some kind of an illegal meeting was going on. And in times of persecution, that became too dangerous and too tough. But they could not give up the sacramental part of the meal. So they took the sacramental part of the evening meal and attached it to the service of the Word in the morning, where it has been ever since. And you find that in Justin Martyr, the First Apology. That's where you get your first outline of Christian worship. If there's anything in that outline that does not make Calvin happy. The outline of the Roman Church. So Calvin made a distinction between fundamental and unimportant matters in worship. Granted, all worship must proceed from the divine inspiration. But in the matter of worship, there were fundamental doctrines and also superficial aids, which were conducive to peace and concord, and which might be left to the judgment of individuals. A Roman Catholic scholar. It's very interesting. The Roman Catholics have really rediscovered Luther about the time of World War II with Lortz and Herder. These two German Roman Catholics, I really owe them a great deal, and I'm delighted they are around. They single-handedly decided it was time to correct the picture of Luther that Roman Catholics had. And they really did a bang-up job. So, Lortz, especially, established a whole school of Catholic scholars in Germany devoted to Reformation studies. And this has gone on in all countries of the world now. There are Roman Catholics studying the Protestant Reformation. And a very famous Roman Catholic by the name of MacDonald, capital McDonnell, OSB, that is the Order of St. Benedict, wrote a book called John Calvin, the Church and the Eucharist. MacDonald, I don't know if he's still there now, but used to live in Collegeville, Minnesota. Collegeville, Minnesota is the center of the American Catholic liturgical revival. St. John's Press. That's very good. That's very good. That's right. And in 1967, dear Father MacDonald wrote this book on the Church and the Eucharist. And he makes a very important point about Calvin and worship. Calvin was impatient of the Roman Mass because he saw in it what he considered exhibitionism. That is, a lot of jumping up and down in worship, bodily acts, all kinds of things going on. And he said that's a form of works righteousness. So you're saving yourself by jumping up and down, or crossing yourself, or kneeling, or doing this or that. And Calvin said, are we attempting to redeem ourselves with these minds? With these shows? If all this ritualism and externalism is theologically valid, then salvation by works could be respectable too. If the liturgy can be legislated, so can salvation. And according to the presupposition, said Calvin, of the Roman Church, Christ did not give us redemption, but the power to redeem ourselves. So Calvin opposed the liturgical life of Reformation Roman Church. As he says in the Institutes 4:10-15, the ceremonies are sacrifices by which God is duly appeased. That's Roman Catholic. Sins are cleansed and righteousness and salvation contained. For who can think himself redeemed by Christ's death when he can now find redemption in the Mass? Who can trust that his sins are forgiven when he has seen a new forgiveness? This amounts to nothing else than the boast that we have been redeemed by Christ, but only on condition that we redeem ourselves. Well, whatever the Roman Catholic interpretation of what Calvin said, and Calvin acknowledges that Roman Catholics are not happy with the way he presents this matter, of these things we are sure. Calvin said, we know that Christ's death and life are not all in the priest's hands. Christ has given us a table at which to feast, not an altar. Wherever this Reformed Reformation went, all the altars were dismantled and replaced by tables. Because all the altars were also, as I said, tombs. There's a piece of a saint or some other holy object in the altar. And Calvin's view was, if that's really true, let's give the poor thing a decent Christian burial after all these years. And surely at the Last Supper, Christ did not celebrate at an altar, but with a table. So when you go to these Protestant churches, you look, and if you can see through and see the pastor's knees, you know it's a table, and it's a Reformed church. Or a Reformed church that knows what it's doing. Let me know if you ever run across these. So, the theological attitude proper to the supper is not that of giving but of receiving, not that of sacrificing but of eating, not that of paying a debt but of receiving a gift. In a word, not of redeeming but of receiving redemption. So Calvin hates all kinds of pomp, as though you're saving yourself by that. When ceremony becomes pomp, Calvin is up in arms. He takes it as a matter of principle that wherever there is great ostentation, sincerity of heart is rare indeed. And then this, only God can make a rite. R-I-T-E. Only God can make a rite. Well, it's an interesting little book, and this Roman Catholic does understand what Calvin is talking about. One other quick little point on this. Calvin's understanding of worship had all kinds of practical consequences, especially in those churches which fell under the influence of Geneva. In 1546, Calvin presented to the council, the town council, a plan for organizing a regular inspection of the country churches dependent on Geneva. You know that old ways of doing things live longer in the country than anywhere else. And Calvin wanted to make sure that there were not all kinds of superstitions going on in the country. So inspections were to be made. Calvin was a practical theologian in the sense that theology was to be put into practice. He was an organizer. I think I told you last time, Luther was a terrible organizer. Pauk's favorite expression was, once Luther was detected mending his own pants, and to get the cloth for his own pants, he cut a piece out of his son's pants. Now that's not terribly bright in terms of organization. But Calvin was a wonderful organizer. He organized the fire department in Geneva. He saw to it that industry was brought to Geneva, so everybody had a job. Very interesting point. Wherever the Protestant Reformation went, there were no beggars. If you couldn't work, the state would take care of you. If you could work, you did. Period. Yeah.
It's a precursor to the utilitarian practice.
Well, a precursor in the sense that it came earlier, but I don't know if there's any kind of a connection. It's a good question, but I just don't know.
Because it has some kind of a movement that these institutions that dealt the same way.
Oh, you mean like the Oneida experiment in upstate New York and stuff like that?
I don't know if they're the same, but it sounds almost exactly the same.
But it's a good
gospel movement.
It's a good point. It's a good point. Here's a point in the modern world where the Mormons do a good there's out of this. No Mormon is ever supposed to beg. Well, take care of your own. And it's a very good idea. In Roman Catholic areas, everybody went around begging, and that's one of the good things you were supposed to do. You're supposed to go around and give charitable contributions. But this was done on a haphazard basis, and really didn't feel the need. Mary, would you like another piece of cake?
No.
Should we get the cake going around
Pass
again?
it around. Yes.
Oh, we got kisses too.
Yes. Pass it.
After making it clear that everybody in every house should come to church on Sunday, you understand this was a state church. Everybody in the 16th century believed in the state church, except the Anabaptists, most of whom were wiped out. If you didn't come to church on Sunday, you had to pay a fine of 3 sous. Unless it's necessary for somebody to stay behind to take care of the children or animals. And then this interesting point, very interesting point. Churches are to be kept shut, locked, except when there is a regularly scheduled worship. Locked, of course. We are rapidly coming to that now because we're all being robbed blind.
With there, yeah.
I can remember at Colgate Rochester, Gene Bartlett was violently opposed to locking up the school so people might want to come in and worship in the chapel and he changed his mind when all the sound equipment and all the carpets were stolen. Then we had a guard. But anyway, churches ought to be kept shut for the remainder of the time. Why? So nobody can go in the churches and engage in superstition. It's the way to stop this. And if anybody should be found practicing any particular superstition in or near a church, and if there should be any superstition which he or she is unwilling to abandon, he shall be punished. Really fairly tough here.
What kind of superstition would that be?
I'm going to give you some. But on this point, there's an excellent book, James Hastings Nichols, Nichols, Corporate Worship in the Reformed Tradition. This is an old standby. Nichols taught at Princeton for a long time. I believe he has died now, but very, very good book. He reminds us that the 20th century Protestant church, locked 6 days a week, has no precedent in the Reformation. All the Reformed churches of the 16th century conducted weekday services before and after working hours with sermon. Well off you are. Can you imagine? Every day preaching service before and after working hours. In Strasbourg, where Butzer was, there was a weekday service of morning prayer with sermon in the parish churches at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. They went by the rising and setting of the sun. You understand that, so it doesn't sound as bad as it might. In most of the Reformed communities, there were 2 or 3 sermons on the Lord's Day and several during the week, sometimes daily. In Calvin's time, there were 12,000 people who lived in Geneva. For them, there were 15 services with sermon every week. Distributed through the 3 churches in Geneva. And by the way, the Lord's Supper was staggered. Calvin wanted it this way, so you could get that every Sunday if you wanted it. You couldn't get away with having it every Sunday as he wanted. But, oh boy. So, 15 services with sermon every week. What does the word church mean to these Reformation people? What does it mean in the New Testament? That's right. So we've been using the word church in the wrong sense. A building is not the church. The church is not primarily a building, but an assembly. And if, as we shall see, buildings made with human hands can indeed become places of worship, it is simply because they are intended to house the assembled liturgical people. What do they call their buildings? What do they call their buildings in New England? Meeting houses. Exactly. For the church. So, and God is not confined just to this building. You don't have to go there. Sign, enter, rest, pray, and rob. But that's just for the gathering of the people. They could gather anywhere, even in an upper room, in a field, anywhere. So, these buildings are intended to house the assembled liturgical people. But it is the people who are the temple. Note Acts 17:24. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by humans. Not God's house. Does not live in shrines made by humans. Nor is God served by human hands as though He needed anything. Since God Himself gives to all life and breath and everything. I haven't. Who brought a Bible? Good. Tell me what's in Acts 7:48 while I rest. I'll give you a hint. That's in the New Testament. Well, all right, go ahead. Will God indeed dwell on earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven. Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain thee. How much less this house which I have built? An Old Testament passage. So, very, very important point. Now, as to some of the naughtinesses, are you ready? I always knew you would want the dirty details of all of this. You must not have a paternoster. What's a paternoster? That's right. And what did it come to be attached to? What? A paternoster, yes, it's our Father. Often came to be connected. It was a common name for a rosary. Paternoster, which is just Latin for our Father, a paternoster. Calvin simply did not want people to be strung along by the venerable bead.
Oh.
Sorry, we have to have a little break. No, I thought that was rather good.
It is very good, it is.
Thank you, Mary. Would you like another piece of candy?
No, thank you. I haven't had any yet. I just brought it along.
Oh, was it you that brought the kisses?
I brought the kisses. Valentine's Day, 2 days later.
I really am stunned. All right, so anybody who brings a rosary or other strings of beads used in repeating a set number of prayers, that's what a paternoster is, and that is a no-no. Or to bring along an image for the purpose of worshiping them. Remember, Paul Tillich last week said, in Reformed worship, an image is a transitory thing. If you stay with it, it becomes an idol. It's to move you away to God. So images, naughty, for the purpose of worshiping them. These people are to be brought before the consistory. That's the church court. And besides the punishment imposed upon them, they are to be brought before their lordships. And then, when you your whole life straightened out, you're not to go on a pilgrimage. I mean, that's bad too. Some shrine. Anybody ever been to St. Anne de Beaupré up in Canada? This is unbelievable. Are there any Roman Catholics in the room? Good, we can speak non-ecumenically and freely. But St. Anne de Beaupré, I think they had the arm of Jesus' grandmother or something like that. Images, this kind of thing. You take trips up there. And my mother and I did this. When I graduated from Union, my mother came back to watch the graduation, and we took a trip home to Canada. We went up to Quebec. And we took the bus trip up to St. Anne de Beaupré. Behind us were two Roman Catholic priests. One said to them, "Wow, why are you going to Calvinism away from the eye gate, seeing things, objects, religious objects, to the ear gate, hearing the word?" So, those who attend the Mass shall, besides being reprimanded, be summoned before their lordships. In such cases, their lordships will have the right of chastising by putting people into jail, or of punishing by extraordinary fines at their discretion. Any person who curses or denies God or his baptism shall on the first occasion be placed on bread and water for 9 days. For the second and third time he is to be punished with some more vigorous corporeal punishment at the discretion of their lordships. If any person contradict the word of God, they shall be summoned before the consistory to be admonished or be remanded to their lordships to receive chastisement according to the needs of the case. If the contradiction or rebellion amount to a scandal which demands a more prompt remedy, the local lord is to take a hand in the matter to preserve the honor of God, the magistrate, and the minister.
I thought God didn't how can man preserve the honor of God?
Well, we are...
Calvin, he thinks that, God is the interfaith, keeping lines with superstition, and how can he say that discipline is necessary?
Well, God is not going to be hurt by this, but he could be dishonored. And that could have very sad consequences. You know, if you take the Lord's Supper in an unworthy way, says Paul, that is why some of you are ill and why some of you have died. We usually don't read that on Sunday morning. But it's there. I can't resist this. If anyone sings songs that are unworthy, dissolute, or outrageous, or spin wildly around in the dance, that person is to be in prison for 3 days. One more, just to give you an idea that everything was put into practice. I do not advise any of you pastors to apply this. But on the other hand, I want to tell you why. Geneva was a terrible place before Calvin got there. It was disgusting. There was a whole quarter run by a queen bee who ran the prostitutes. It was a very, very disgusting town, and the Protestants tried hard to change it. This one I love. On Sunday the 28th of July, at the main service of worship at 8 o'clock, an ordinance made by their lordships was announced in the church of St. Peter's, ordering that girls who had not kept their honor should not present themselves in church for marriage with a hat, which virgins are accustomed to wear. Well, the point of all of this is simply to indicate that Calvin's theology was put into practice. Maybe not in a way that you like. I'm not arguing that. And I'm trying to indicate what it was like in the 16th century and what he was trying to do and why. The theology was put into practice. Calvin was never a theologian who merely wanted to speculate about God. As Dowie, one could call him, in the good sense of the word, an existentialist. he was capable of saying the main question is not whether there is a God, but what God is like. Could be from Kierkegaard. Calvin is not first preoccupied with formulating correct propositions about God as if this need be or could be perfected prior to a subsequent expression of it in worship. First, he concerns himself to show the proper worship relationship. Even in writing theology, which is primarily an intellectual effort, he put an expression of existential character of the knowledge of God before the doctrine of God itself. And worship, as we will continue to see, is of major importance to him and must be done in accordance with God's revealed will. Now, some of you in the Luther course heard what I'm going to read now, but we're going, this is a nice cane.
Yes, it is. I'm glad you.
Am I to keep it?
Yes, it's a present.
Oh, how adorable. Oh, thank you. I did bring the book. I want to indicate the extent of the superstitions at the time of the Protestant Reformation. Some of you will remember the list of relics which were posted at the Wittenberg Church where Martin Luther lived. Because the elector, do you remember who Luther's ruler was? I know this is, of course, in Calvin. Who was Luther's ruler? Does anybody remember this? What?
The Elector of Saxony.
The Elector of Saxony. Excellent. And what was his particular name? That's good. You've got a B+. Would you like to try for that? The Elector of Saxony.
Frederick.
Yes. Frederick. Frederick of Why?
I said it so often, I should have thought somebody would have heard it. Giving
Frederick
away.
the Wise had an absolute passion to collect all the relics he could find. He sent agents to the Holy Land to buy all the relics he could find. Tell my agents, we need a head of John the Baptist. Maybe a risk of a saint or something like that. Marvelous. So, here I'm now going to read you from the official catalog of the relics. Some of you will be appalled by this. I hope so. I hope some of you become ill. It really is, and you will see the context for Calvin as a good Old Testament scholar and a hater of idols, and also a humanist scholar, loving the mind and the expression of the intellect against this kind of thing. I must admit, I absolutely hate it. Have I told you recently that I despise medieval art?
Let us try to be objective, Professor.
3 pieces. In fact, you will be so astonished at all of this that you will be even more astonished if there's anything left of the Holy Crazy Catholics digging the whole thing up, shipping them back to Europe to be worshipped.
You pass it around,
Head of John the Baptist, let's find him one. 3 pieces of the city where the Virgin Mary was born. 1 piece of a yarn which she spun. 1 piece of the house where she lived at the age of 14. Now that's remarkable. 1 piece of the house where she lived at the age of 14. 2 pieces of the city of Mount Zion where Mary lived. 2 pieces of the room where Mary was greeted by an angel. Now this again will curdle your sensibilities. 5 particles of the milk of the Virgin Mary.
Oh,
how did they go about getting this?
You know, that's just what Calvin asked. May I ask how this was collected, he said. Was his answer. I mean, you know.
Isn't there supposed to be more than one, or wasn't there more than one head of the
Oh, every saint had at least 3 bodies, so Calvin knew that at least 2 were a fake. And probably the 3rd. And he was infuriated that supposedly adult human beings should exercise their time and body, as he said, collecting such trifles. Calm yourself, Charles. One piece of the tree where Mary nursed the Lord near the Garden of Balsam. I mean, 4 pieces of the hair of Mary. You understand that you can only have the milk and hair and nails of Mary because of the assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary right into heaven. So you can't have other parts of her body. Otherwise, as Calvin said, well, I won't tell you on that. 3 pieces of the shirt of Mary, 3 pieces of one robe of Mary, 8 pieces of other robes of Mary, 4 pieces of the belt of Mary, 7 pieces of the veil of Mary, 2 pieces of the veil of Mary, which was sprinkled with the blood of Christ under the cross. 1 piece of the city where Mary died. 1 piece of the wax candle given to Our Lady when she died. 6 pieces of the grave of Mary. 2 pieces of the earth of the grave. What about a French Protestant pastor, a Calvinist, taking the tour of Rome and seeing all this stuff? One relic after another. So finally he said to his guide, you know, we have a relic back in our little French Protestant church. The guy became very excited and said, what is it? There were 5,005 pieces of relics. 5,005. By the year 1518, you will be excited to learn the collection had grown to 17,443 articles, including 204 portions and 1 whole corpse of the Holy Innocents. To this, if you looked at it on All Saints' Day, you could have an indulgence of 127,799 years and 116 days. What's an indulgence? Pardon? Yeah, the sacrament of penance. When you go and confess your sins to the priest and are absolved and so on, then the priest can give you a satisfaction. Go off and say 100 Hail Marys. But the papacy needed money, and so they were willing to sell an indulgence which allowed you to substitute for the satisfaction you were supposed to make. Supposing you didn't like what the priest told you to do, then you handed him an indulgence, a piece of paper, and say, I don't have to say 5 million Hail Marys. I have paid a certain amount of money, and this will cover it. Yeah. That's very good. Put it on my tab. The Christian answer is to put it on Jesus' tab. That's good. Never thought that before. That's okay. 17,443 portions of the Holy Innocents. And you got an indulgence of 127,799 years and 116 days. Now, Luther didn't like this either, but for a lot of this stuff for Luther, it was adiaphora. Luther was not bothered so much about idols anyway. He felt, you know, if you kill the idol in your heart, it only becomes an art object. And you can keep it in your house or church. But for Calvin, that had to be smashed. Quickly now, in about 5 minutes, the most popular book that Calvin ever wrote. Do you associate Calvin with a glorious sense of humor? You are about to. In 1543, he wrote a book called An Inventory of Relics. It was exceedingly popular in its own day. Not terribly popular now because it really isn't the kind of thing that advances the ecumenical movement. It's not often been reprinted in the modern period, although if you read your assignments, which I ask you to do, Eyre's little article on idolatry in the George book, you must read that. He talks about it. He talks about the inventory of relics. Hugh Thompson Kerr says it is perhaps still highly offensive to Roman Catholics. That's the understatement of the year, except for the liberal Roman Catholic. It's marvelously insulting and sarcastic, and I love every word of it. Lots of commentaries call it sardonic, which when I looked it up, I found out it means bitterly scornful, disdainfully or sneeringly derisive. One scholar says this is the nearest thing in Calvin to the sense of humor. And look in your Edwards book on page 264. You all do have the Edwards book. You should all have that, because there are going to be lots of readings in this thing, and I think they're very good. How many of you have looked at this? You should look at it. It's really pretty good. George. Why did I say that? George by George. John Calvin and the Church. And on page 249, according to Calvin, the purpose of human existence is to know God and glorify Him by worship and obedience. It was wonderful. The pastor at church who read the scriptures and stressed, obey. Here it is. Obey, obey, obey. He also calls your attention to a couple of words. Non-S. This is the Calvinistic idea. The finite cannot contain the infinite. This is part of the idea against idolatry. Now, you can't go too far with this, or you'll end up denying the incarnation. But on the whole, it is not a bad idea. God is entirely other. God is different from the flesh. God transcends all materiality. And so on. And when Calvin, in this great treatise, 250, I want you to read this chapter carefully and memorize it, in the necessity of reforming the church, this great thing that he wrote for the Diet of Spire in 1544, giving it to the Holy Roman Emperor, he says, talking about the whole substance of Christianity, listen to this, namely, a knowledge, first, of the right way to worship God, and secondly, of the source from which salvation is to be sought. Isn't that remarkable that in this, the worship business is mentioned before anything else? We cannot be a Christian without a proper knowledge of worship. And places worship before salvation in order of cognitive importance. In some of this sarcasm, you can see that he's influenced by Erasmus. Although Erasmus never went this far, Erasmus stayed within the Roman Church and wrote his stuff for the educated people and so on. It was also wanted a more internal kind of religion. But Calvin really goes wild with this. And
that kind of idea about the Trinitarian understanding
I didn't. Yes, I did.
Speak louder.
Speak loudly. Diaphragmatic breathing.
on the death of the cross, there remained the sovereignty of God.
There remains what?
Sovereignty of God.
Oh, the sovereignty of God.
That's the idea of Calvin.
Yes. Okay.
According to that extra-Calvinistic then how do we understand the Trinitarian God? There is no totally identity between Jesus Christ and God on the cross.
Except you didn't listen to what Edward said. He said, you can't apply this to everything. You can't apply it to the incarnation. It does not apply to the incarnation. But as far as all other objects are concerned, you can't apply it to them. Well, there's no part of church history which is more fascinating to my students than Calvin's discussion of virgin milk. All at once, they become interested in the course after weeks of abject boredom. Even I got interested in what I was saying. And here is what he said. This may be too tough. If this is too tough, is there anybody under 18 here? With regard to the Virgin Mary, as the Roman Catholics give out that her body is not on earth, just because of the assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, they are of course prevented from pretending to have her bones. Were it otherwise, I can well believe they would have given her a body of such a size as would be enough to fill 1,000 coffins. But what is denied with reference to the whole body, they have endeavored to compensate by hair and milk. As to the milk, it cannot be necessary to enumerate all the places where it is shown. This is true. Every nunnery, every monastery would have a vial of virgin milk. Indeed, the task would be endless, for there is no town, however small, no monastery or nunnery, however insignificant, which does not have some in less and others in greater amounts. Not that they would have been ashamed to have kept it in hogsheads, but they thought the lie might be more acceptable if they had only a small amount, as could be kept in a small vial, for in this form it can be kept back from minute inspection. But had the Virgin yielded a more copious supply of milk than is usually given by a cow, or had she continued to nurse during her entire lifetime, she never could have come up with a quantity which is exhibited in Roman churches. And then he asked, again, I would fain know how the milk was collected so it could be preserved until our own time. Erasmus had said something like this earlier. Oh, mother most like her son, she left so much of her milk that it's scarcely credible a woman with only one child could have so much, even if the child had